get the honor of traveling across the states. Most years I travel to about 50 different states. Last year, our staff alone made 500 plus trips into your offices. We've met you in legislative committee rooms, we've met you in the governor's office, we've met you inside your capitol, we've met you at interim committee hearings. We also read all your bills, and we actually enjoy doing that. But we tag all of your bills and all the education policies that are out there. In the last 4 years, we have actually read more than 5,000 bills, analyzed them, pulled out the education policies in them, and put them in our database to serve you. And so for the next few minutes, I want to talk to you about policies that I've seen and about people that you need to meet with who are really leading areas across our country where states are truly leading the way. I want to start by talking a little bit about HighQuality PreK. We know that HighQuality PreK has a big importance in your states. We know this because we've seen over the last 5 years a 47% increase in state funding of HighQuality PreK. But when I talk about states leading the way, it's actually not a state that I want you to follow. It's the District of Columbia. In the District of Columbia, under the leadership of their superintendent, Hansel King, they have focused on HighQuality PreK, but more than that, on engagement in getting enrollment at the right numbers. They have over 85% of their 4-year-olds and 79% of their 3-year-olds enrolled in HighQuality PreK programs. And it's a state that you should look at because it's an area where a lot of states are having questions. FullDay Kindergarten continues to be a discussion in many of your states. And while FullDay Kindergarten has financial advantages for parents who don't have to pay for half-day daycare, there's also some outcomes that are very important. We know through research that students who participate in a full-day kindergarten experience usually score 13% higher on reading scores than their peers who went to a half-day kindergarten. There's a lot of states who are looking at this, but one state or two states that I think you really need to be considering are Connecticut. Connecticut implemented full-day kindergarten in the last 2 years, and they're paying for it with Keno revenue. In Rhode Island, they implemented full-day kindergarten, not necessarily the way many have done it in other states, but instead, they actually lowered the minimum age at which you have to go to school. It used to be 6, they moved it to 5. These are 2 states who've taken action recently. There are now, as of May, 30 states that have some kind of state-sponsored and funded full-day kindergarten. As we talk about early learning, though, the big issue that evolves a lot is governance. A report that came out from the Bipartisan Research Center actually showcased that the federal government has 9 streams of funding coming into your state that all serve different early learning areas. In many of those cases, those funds are coming into 3 to 4 different states. The report showcased that governors actually have the authority to move 8 of those funds wherever they want. Only 1 of the funds must go to a certain agency. And so there's a couple of states that have done some really interesting things around this to get better outcomes. New Mexico is one I would urge you to look at. In her first term this year, Governor Grisham actually worked to move 3 to 4 different agencies that were serving early learning services into one new agency called the New Mexico Early Education and Care Agency. This is a big move for a first-term governor to do in the first 6 months that she's been in office. Another state is Texas that I would urge you to look at. Texas is in the middle, under the leadership of Commissioner Mike Morath, of a birth to 5 needs assessment across the whole state. Texas received a federal grant to look at this. Some of your states also received federal grants. But what Commissioner Morath is doing is actually bringing that information back to the Texas Early Learning Council to actually set a strategic plan for how they could rearrange and get better outcomes from early learning programs. In both of these cases, governance of early learning is one of the biggest deterrents to actually getting meaningful outcomes because the agencies that are serving those students are all over state agencies. There's been a lot of discussion in a lot of states around 3rd grade reading. What is the right policy? How do we do it? And I'm not sure I know exactly what the right policy is, but we know that 3rd grade is one of those pivotal points where you change from learning to read to reading to learn. We also know that a lot of states have put some funding in for mentorships or assistance, trying to figure out how to help kids. One state that I'd urge you to look at is actually Idaho. Idaho, under the direction of Governor Little, put a big amount of money in. You got to laugh at that one. I practiced the speech. My daughters told me it was a premier dad joke and it needed to be removed, but I didn't. Governor Little actually doubled the funding for their state's literacy program this year. $13 million more than what had been there before, and it's a program that is one that is making a big impact for what they're doing in that state. Beyond what we see on third grade reading, there's some really interesting policies that are out there around career exploration. I usually think of career exploration as something I would do in high school. I'd get into a career and tech ed program, or maybe I'd try to get an internship. But in 3 states, they've actually moved policies to allow for career exploration to start in middle school. In Maine last year, they passed legislation that actually allows for pilot programs that are career and tech ed related to be taught in their middle schools. And 2 states that have been doing this for a while are Nebraska and North Carolina, both of which have been very heavy on programs that allow middle school students an opportunity to get a better understanding of what career choices they might want to be making. This leads into a lot of the work that states have been doing around STEM. And we know that STEM is a very big issue because for most of your economies, the STEM jobs are growing at twice the rate of other industries in your state. We also know that how early you can engage a child in a STEM course matters. Research shows that a child who is enrolled in a STEM course by age 13 is much more likely to actually go into a STEM field. There's a bunch of states that are doing STEM policies, but a few that are interesting in my mind. Maryland and Indiana. In both of those states, they had some significant additional funding for STEM policies, and in one of the states, they actually set up a STEM center that could be utilized to help teachers to better understand how to use STEM in their curriculum. In the state of California, they actually had a very interesting change a year ago. The State Board of Education in California actually put computer science into standards for California. The first time that state had ever done that. The vice chair of the California State Board is Eileen Strauss, and she is here with us for the National Forum, and I'd urge you to talk to her about why they made that policy change and what it afforded students in California to better understand the digital world that we all live in. And 2 states that looked at it a little bit differently were New Hampshire and Wyoming. In both of those states, they increased the number of computer science opportunities that would be allowed in their K-12 curriculum. Wyoming took it a step further by requiring that you have to have 1 computer science credit to graduate high school in that state. But beyond just the policies, in Wyoming, Jillian Balo, who is the superintendent there in Wyoming and was our former treasurer, actually started a program called Boot Up Wyoming, a program that has funding from Microsoft that is set up to promote STEM and computer science programs across the state, even in rural areas, and provides trainings for teachers to better understand how to incorporate that. STEM is not the only policy that states are moving on. We're seeing a lot of work around the arts, and especially when related to STEM. So the science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. At the Education Commission of the States, we have the Arts Education Partnership as a major component of a partnership with the U.S. Department of Ed and the National Endowment for the Arts. And we see a lot of states that are trying to figure out how to integrate arts in their STEM programs. 2 of those are Ohio and Florida. In Ohio, they actually changed some of the requirements for what it would take to get a diploma endorsement of STEAM. And in Ohio now, if you take the right courses in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, your diploma comes with an added endorsement that is beneficial for you down the road. In Florida, they're using federal funds to actually create a career cluster. They have used Perkins funds to create a career cluster for students that focuses on audio-visual communications and the arts so students can get a better understanding about what their opportunities will be in today's economy. School safety is a tough one. It's a very tough one for a lot of us because it impacts what we do every day. We've seen a major increase in states that have schools using live video surveillance. From 1999 to 2016, that number increased exponentially in live video surveillance. But it did because of activities that are unfortunate. We know in 2018, there was a school shooting once every 9 days. We also know that governors heard the problem. 18 governors in their State of the State this year highlighted school safety measures that were a priority for them, and legislators were on top of this also. There were over 600 bills introduced since January 1st of this year that focus on K-12 school safety or college campus safety. A couple of the states that you might want to consider for the work they've done, two are Georgia and North Dakota. Both of those states put large amounts of money into their budget, and it's money that can be utilized by schools for school safety plans, for actually building improvements, for school resource officers, and for counseling. Senator Shively from North Dakota is here with us for the National Forum and would be a great resource since he actually worked on this bill in North Dakota. We know that in Utah, Senator Milner, who's here with us also, worked on two major pieces of legislation that both became law focused on student health and counseling support for students. And she would gladly talk to you about some of the issues that they were trying to tackle. And lastly, Governor Bullock in the state of Montana passed some major legislation this year on student data privacy and records. A new move for Montana, but a reality that many of you are dealing with daily and an important bill that you can learn from. Along with school safety, there's a lot of policies around student health and wellness. And one of the issues we've seen a lot around is the opioid epidemic. We know that in 2017, 47,000 Americans overdosed on opioid. That means they died. 4,000 of those were youth. In 3 states, they're trying to tackle this from the schools the best they can. And in the states of Kansas, Virginia, and West Virginia, school nurses are now allowed to be trained in the administration of Narcan, the drug that actually reverses the epidemic of the opioid overdose. In those states, it's not just that they can be trained, but they're allowed to administer the drug and to maintain a supply of the drug on school property. And it's an interesting approach that we want to watch to see if it's going to help to bring down some of those numbers. English language learners is a growing number across our country. We know from research that 1 in 5 children in K-12 in America live in a household where English is not the primary language. We also know from research that Dr. Jim Johnson has done, a demographer from North Carolina who's going to be speaking Friday, that 2014 was a change year for K-12 populations. In 2014, children of color became the majority of our K-12 population. So this isn't something that's changing slowly. This is who we are actually serving. And Arizona is one state that has taken some interesting changes on English language learners. If you look at Arizona and look up their NAEP scores for 4th grade reading and 8th grade reading, Arizona has had some of the highest increases of all the states. But for English language learners, they haven't moved the needle very much. One policy that Governor Ducey endorsed and helped to put into place was actually a policy that allows English language learners to be taught in classrooms with their English-speaking peers. Previously, as in many states, they're taught with other non-English speaking students in a classroom. This is going to be interesting to see outcomes because we've seen pilots in some school districts, but this is the first time we've seen a state that's taken a big move like that. There's a lot of issues that we see around children and their life experiences. And we know that 25% of the youth in America have experienced a trauma. And we know that 75% of our children who are in a juvenile justice facility have experienced a trauma also. But how do you deal with that? And what's the best policy to try to deal with trauma-informed education? Well, it's not a bill, but a shout out to Commissioner Michael Johnston from Alaska, who actually this year released a major report which looks at the national research on how best to teach students who have been through traumas, and also looks at best practices for teachers so that they actually have tools needed to make a difference in this. Commissioner Johnson is with us here for the National Forum also, and I'd urge you to have a chance to talk with him. When we think about teacher compensation, unfortunately because of some of our news, we think about a teacher strike or a proposed teacher strike that may have been talked about in your states. One thing we do know, though, is when you look at the teacher compensation, going back to 1996 and adjusting for inflation, the average teacher in America is paid $27 less per week than they were in 1996. A couple of states, and there's many that have taken big actions in the last 2 years, but a couple of states that I'd urge you to look at are Arkansas and South Dakota. In Arkansas, under the leadership of Governor Hutchinson, there was a 4-year plan that was passed that includes $60 million in funding to increase teacher salaries by 13% over the next 4 years. Governor Hutchinson's Chief of Staff, Bill Gossage, is here with us for the National Forum. I talked with him last night, and he would love to talk about some of the positives and negatives of what they ended up with in this bill. The second is South Dakota. South Dakota, 3 years ago, worked with us at the Education Commission of the States on a rewrite of their school finance bill. But a lot of it was focused on teacher pay, as they ranked 51st in the nation in teacher pay at the time. At the time that bill was passed, the chief state school officer there was Melody Shop, and she has since retired, but she is here with us. And when they put that bill into place with significant new funding and some changes, 1 year after it was passed, the average teacher salary increase in South Dakota was $10,000 in 1 year. A big impact to try to make sure that they can keep the right teachers in the districts that they need for the future workforce of South Dakota. Compensation is not the only issue that we see dealing with teachers. Some of it is the teacher pipeline. I get a lot of calls from governors' offices, usually around August, saying we have thousands of teacher openings. Which state should we advertise in? The difficulty is that this is a national epidemic. We know that in 2008, the number of college students who were enrolled in a teacher prep program was 719,000 college students. And in 2016, the number enrolled in a teacher prep program is 441,000. That's a dramatic drop in 8 years. So states are looking at some innovative things like alternative certification and what else can we do. But there's some states that are trying to figure out how can we do some of this to actually make sure we can keep this growing. One of those, or three of those states are Minnesota, Alabama, and Delaware, which in the last 2 years, those three states have put together policies that allow for teachers' student loans to be paid off by the state if the teacher is actually taking a job in a hard-to-fill job or in some rural areas. We also know that we've had success with some of the programs that were kind of built from the ground up, like Iowa's. Iowa has a teacher career path and compensation program that was actually discussed at length across most of the state and with most of the districts, and has a really good buy-in as to what it provides for some of the teachers. Perfect? No, but really well versed and well articulated throughout the entire state. And also Wisconsin. Wisconsin, under their former chief, Tony Evers, had a plan that was put together that allowed for state dollars to be available to school districts in the form of grants for hard-to-need teacher positions in rural districts or in some urban, low socioeconomic districts. That state grant is still there and available in Wisconsin and is still being utilized. Tony Evers left, though, because as many of you know, he ran for governor and got elected governor. And small Cliff Clavin fact, he's only the second chief, I believe, who has actually run for governor and become governor in their state. So it's great to still be working with Tony in that capacity. We've seen a lot of work around career and tech ed, and specifically in your states on what do you get if you have an internship or apprenticeship. A few states that have made major changes on this, one is Michigan. This isn't even a big change, but it seems so logical. Michigan changed their law so if a high school student gets an internship, they actually get high school credit for it now. That small change makes more high school students interested in looking for those outside of school work experiences and has more employers probably saying, well, this is worth doing because I have a pool of students who are eager to get this experience. Vermont had some changes that Governor Scott put in place in the last 2 years, really focused on high-needs jobs, but this was about CTE through high school for advanced manufacturing and cybersecurity. And it is specific to industries that they hope to grow and how they can help more students move through career and tech ed experiences. And lastly, the states of Washington and South Carolina. In the state of Washington this year, Governor Jay Inslee put in his State of the State and in legislation that passed the promise and funding for 100,000 paid internships over the next 10 years in the state of Washington. And a lot of that was following some leads from what South Carolina has been doing. South Carolina has one of the most robust apprenticeship programs in the nation, and they've had that for a while. South Carolina is one of our state spotlights that's going to be speaking tomorrow about how they put the apprenticeship program into place and the benefits that they're seeing after a few years of having it there. When we look at the changes that are happening in dual enrollment, many of your states have been tackling this for a while. But there's some interesting research that's starting to come out around dual enrollment. We are seeing research that shows that middle-achieving students Those students who their test scores say are not college ready are actually fully capable of passing dual enrollment courses in high school and achieving college credit. So we've seen a lot of states that have made some policy changes, but Oklahoma is one I'd urge you to take a look at. In Oklahoma, over the last couple of years, they have drastically changed the options that are available for some of their students. And so students in Oklahoma now as a senior have a set number of hours that they are able to actually receive that are tuition and fee-free. And juniors have a smaller number of hours that are available. Again, providing that for all students across the entire state with the hope that it means there's more students who are going for some post-secondary degree or credential. Developmental education. This is a real tough one that you see in a lot of your states. Most of these are students who go to college, but because of a test they took, they are actually placed in a math class or reading class that is under the minimum. We know that students who are in a lot of these developmental ed programs have very low retention rates and very low graduation rates. The intent is right, but the solution is not there. We've seen a couple of states that are making some big moves because we know that 50% of the students in a 2-year institution and 33% of the students in a 4-year institution are in a developmental ed class of some kind. Massachusetts is one state that made a small policy change through their Board of Higher Ed. And the policy change was to say that institutions can look at a test score or go back and look at that individual's GPAs in specific math or reading classes to place that student. Thus, maybe finding ways for some students to actually place them in the higher math class, even if their test scores said that they weren't ready for that. New York is another state who's been doing a lot of work on this. New York has 2 entities. They have the City Universities of New York and the State Universities of New York, both of which are part of a program we have at the Education Commission of the States called Strong Start to Finish. A program that is focused on 5 states, 6 entities, really looking for reforms for Dev Ed that is evidence-based and focused on first-year students of color to get them to and through for success in those courses. The other states that are involved in this with us are Arkansas, Ohio, California, Georgia, and of course, New York. Adult learners. We think of adult learners as being anybody over age 22 a lot of the times, 18 to 22 being when you might be in college. But we know that the demographics are dramatically different for our country now. We know that 40% of our college students in America are working part-time or full-time. We know that 38% of our college students are well over the age of 22. They're over the age of 25. And we know that 1/4 of our college students actually are parents. It's not that easy to be a full-time student if you're a parent. There's some states that are making some big issues here, and it's really interesting to see their approaches. Hawaii and Oregon have both done a lot of work around prior learning credits for adult learners. How do you engage adults who do not have a degree, and what kind of credit do they deserve for experience they had in high school, business school, trade schools, or military? And one state that's been very innovative is Mississippi. Mississippi has a program called Complete to Compete, where they are actively going out and finding adults who have some college experience but no degree or credential, and working with them to show them the route to get further down the road and hopefully achieve that goal. Governor Bryant has been very, very supportive on this. He's been our chair for the last 2 years, and his Director of Workforce Development, Lori Smith, is here with us at this national forum, and she'd be a great resource if you want to find out more. When we think about the transition from post-secondary to workforce, this is a really tough one for some states, but 2 have created programs to create a very easy pathway for students to get some post-secondary degree or certification and immediately move into a job. We know that a lot of states are trying to do this because of their attainment rates. Many of you have set a goal of 40 or 50 or 60% of attainment rates for graduation, but the reality is a lot of states are still sitting at only about 33% of your population who have achieved that degree or certification. The states that I want you to think about are Missouri and Kentucky. In Missouri, Governor Parson has actually created a program called Fast Track Missouri. And Governor Parson put another $22 million into this program just this year, and it's focused on high-needs jobs in Missouri so that they can help students and adult learners transition to that degree or certification and directly into a high-paying job. In Kentucky, Governor Bevin has been working for 3 years now, I believe, on Workforce Ready Kentucky. And that program is focused on 5 high-needs jobs that Kentucky has, and how do we create the pipeline to make sure that we're fulfilling those needs for those employers. Post-secondary access is a really, really touchy issue. We know it's been a big one, but it hasn't moved very far in some states. We know that in the last 4 years, 36 states have debated bills on free college, but there aren't that many that have actually passed something yet. 2 states that did are New Jersey and Tennessee. In New Jersey, Governor Murphy actually signed legislation that allows for free community college at 13 of the 19 community colleges in their state for students that meet a certain low-income threshold. Their focus for the first year of this program is directly on 13,500 students in New Jersey, and it's to create the beginning of a pipeline to help those who need it the most. In Tennessee in 2014, under the leadership of Governor Haslam, who was term limited last year, Governor Haslam put in place the Tennessee Promise. The promise that if you graduate high school in Tennessee with a certain GPA, you can go to community college for 2 years for free. The program was so successful that in 2017, Governor Haslam expanded it to adults who do not have an associate's or a bachelor's degree. In 2018, we were honored to give Governor Haslam our highest award at the Education Commission of the States, the James Bryant Conan Award, for his commitment to education. There's some innovative policies. Somebody from Tennessee over there. There's some interesting policies that are focused on even smaller demographics. In Illinois, they have a new program called the Bridge Program, which is under a bill that passed called the Underrepresented Students Act. This is focused on counseling and assistance for a key demographic of students who they don't see being able to make it to and through post-secondary to a degree or credential, but they know through research that with the right counseling, they are successful to get there. In Nevada, they had legislation that passed under the leadership of Assemblywoman Miller, who is here with us, and signed into law by their new governor, Governor Sisolak, that is actually the homeless youth liaison. It is set up to support homeless youth in getting into post-secondary institutions and receiving a degree. And last but not least, I want to talk about the great state of Pennsylvania and our incoming chair, Governor Wolf. Some of you may have seen in the news that last week on July 1st, Governor Wolf signed into law the first ever state GI Bill. In Pennsylvania, if you serve now in the Pennsylvania National Guard, you are guaranteed post-secondary education benefits for your service to the state. But the bill goes beyond that. It actually provides those post-secondary education benefits to the person who's serving in the Pennsylvania National Guard, their spouse, and their children. A pretty impressive bill, and one that was tailored in Pennsylvania for a specific niche group that they wanted to make sure was having access. And the last issue I want to talk about is financial aid. Looking at what needs to be done for financial aid for most students involves filling out the FAFSA form. You all know what it is. My wife and I have 3 children. 2 of them are in college. That is not an easy form. And it's got to be especially hard if you've never filled out a FAFSA form before or you've never gone to college. We know that many people don't complete the form because there's over $2 billion in financial aid, federal, state, and private, that goes unused every single year. We also know that across the country, the rate of actually having your FAFSA forms completed by state is only 55%. In Louisiana, the superintendent of education, John White, did something kind of crazy a couple of years ago. John actually worked through rules and regs and required that you have to fill out your FAFSA form if you want to graduate from high school in Louisiana. Sounds crazy. They haven't held anybody back from getting their high school diploma. There are some opt-out provisions that allow it to be not utilized. And again, a high school student can't fill out the FAFSA form because it's dealing with the parents' taxes. So this is a burden on the parents. But in 1 year, that simple policy change for Louisiana, they went from 48% to 77% completion rate in 1 year. So what John did was great from a policy perspective. But what John actually did was he forced dining room table conversations across his state about, could I afford to go to post-secondary school? Can I go to the community college? Can I go to the state university? Can I go and get career tech ed? An impressive policy, and we know it's going to be trending in a lot of your states. I know that because if you read Inside Higher Ed this morning, there was an article that Texas just approved the same thing, and it's going to start for them in 2020-2021 school year. And last, but absolutely not least, Colorado. Governor Polis came into office in January, and he's had a lot of education issues that he has supported. But one that I thought was most interesting really deals with 529 plans. 529 plans are the federal tax plans that allow you to save for post-secondary education, or with the new tax law, some K-12 expenditures also. Governor Polis signed a law that actually says that every Coloradoan who is born from 2020 to 2040, if their parents open up a 529 account before they're 5 years old, state of Colorado puts the first $100 into the account. It's actually going to be funded through donations, not even taxpayer dollars, and it will be adjusted for inflation over the 20 years. But the issue there is, again, like John White did in Louisiana and Governor Polis was able to do here in Colorado, it's changing the conversation for parents to understand the value of investing early in a post-secondary education for their children. There are a lot of amazing successes that each of you have. I'm sure I didn't mention the bill you wanted me to, depending on which state you're from. But the one thing I want you to be looking at for the next 3 days is the real successes that are happening in the states and how it would be easy for you to move 3 or 4 of these policies I just outlined in your state next year. States are truly leading the way. And it's an honor to be able to work with each of you in this capacity and to see the successes that you are having. On behalf of the amazing policy team we have who did all the research for this speech for me, and on behalf of our entire staff, I am truly honored to welcome you to the 2019 National Forum on Education Policy.